our momentum doesn't end abruptly. It kind of erodes away instead. And so it's not like we don't stop moving forward in life or feeling that we're moving forward in life because we've hit a wall, so to speak. I would say that we tend to slow down because we've hit something small but disruptive along the way. Now we're in 2026.
Yeah.
And everyone's goals are well on their way.
Either they've already failed.
That's true. That is true.
Hopefully they're still going. But
right.
We all know how easy it can be for your New Year's resolutions
right.
to not work out. But that's okay.
Yeah, we think we all mean well, but sometimes we overshoot and have to recalibrate ourselves, maybe.
You know, when we went to an elite retreat a few months ago, last fall, we were meeting with a bunch of executives and working professionals,
mm-hmm.
and one of the things that we needed to do at the end of the retreat is, set up some goals on some things
right.
you want to change and adjust. I was like, gosh darn it, I was so ramped up. I'm like, I'm going to make some serious changes in my life. And so I was like, I'm going to do this 7 days a week.
Oh, that's
or do this.
Sure.
I need to put my foot in the, just draw a line in the concrete and just do it.
And just do it.
And every single one of them, it was like a group of like 12 people, and they looked at me like, "You sure you want to do that?"
Yeah.
Like,
yeah.
Of course. I'm like, if I'm going to make a change, I'm going to make a change.
Yeah.
And they're like, no, that's you're setting yourself up for failure because you're going to miss one day and then you're going to be ticked at yourself
right.
and you're going to quit.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Take it in context, and you got to be realistic with yourself too.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So what are we talking about today?
Today we're going to talk about thinking patterns, and I want to talk about thinking patterns that kind of slow us down, and particularly slow down our momentum, and then how to notice them in real time. So, sometimes we feel like when we're working towards things in life, our progress can slow down, or sometimes we just feel life slows down because we've had a failure of some kind. You face a bump in the road, so to speak.
Sure.
We're going to call them cognitive speed bumps today. But what I want people to know is that momentum doesn't end abruptly. Sometimes we think that when we're moving along on the road of life, so to speak, and we're working towards things and we're trying to make progress, sometimes we feel our momentum just disappears. And what I want to talk to people about today is that our momentum doesn't end abruptly. It kind of erodes away instead. And so it's not like we don't stop moving forward in life or feeling that we're moving forward in life because we've hit a wall, so to speak. I would say that we tend to slow down because we've hit something small but disruptive along the way. You kind of following me so far?
Yeah.
So it's not like we're driving down a road. It's like when you're driving in a car. It's very rare, I would argue, that a wall would suddenly pop up in the middle of the road and you'd crash into it to stop your forward momentum. I would say that event is pretty rare.
Yeah.
But what's much less rare is a bump in the road, whether it's a rock that maybe rolled onto the road or a speed bump in a parking lot. Those bumps on the road, they slow down our momentum a heck of a lot.
Mm-hmm.
And they're very, very disruptive. So something really small, like a speed bump, slows down our driving and our forward momentum when we're driving. And I would argue in the same way, sometimes small things can kind of really disrupt our momentum moving forward in life. But what I also want to say is that those speed bumps aren't dramatic failures of thinking. Instead, they're kind of normal protective mental habits, which was what we're going to talk about. In the same way, speed bumps don't stop the car. They slow it down just enough to make the drive feel harder. In the same way, these bumps that we face in life, they don't stop us from moving forward. It feels like they slow us down. Now, before we get into it, I always want to add the caveat that we're not talking about significant life events like the sudden tragic death of a loved one, for example,
right.
or something much more serious and traumatic. And we're talking about the little things along the way that kind of disrupt our momentum or our flow that we feel have completely stopped us, that can get us feeling discouraged. Are you kind of following me so far?
I am. Yep, you bet.
So let's first kind of define what those cognitive speed bumps are. And that is, when I talk about speed bumps in our lives, they're really just thought patterns that interrupt action without announcing themselves. They're these thoughts that we have that kind of creep into our daily lives that are kind of habitual. And then oftentimes they sound reasonable, responsible, or even wise, which is why they're so hard to spot. And we'll talk about specific ones coming up here, but
Sure.
these aren't necessarily thoughts that are negative in the traditional sense. Sometimes they're well-intentioned cautions that stay engaged just a bit too long, especially when the stakes feel really high in our lives, whether
Sure.
it's goals we're working on, whether it's relationships we're working on, family goals, those kinds of things.
Mm-hmm.
And so they kind of, they're well-intentioned cautions that stay engaged for too long, especially when the stakes are high. Our identity feels involved to an extent, or energy is already low. So you all these things kind of can work against us, and that these negative thoughts can impact. But I would also argue is that if you have a thinking brain, which we all do,
Sometimes
you have cognitive speed bumps. Humans, we're unique creatures in the fact that we were able to think about our lives and we're able to think about our actions.
Mm-hmm.
Some animals can think about what they're doing in a very primitive sense, but not to the degree of sophistication that humans can. And one of the drawbacks to that is we can kind of be our own worst enemy, and we can kind of create our own speed bumps just by way of thinking about it too much.
Oh, interesting. Sure.
So let's kind of talk about some common cognitive speed bumps. The first one I call is perfection before permission. Okay, and that's kind of this idea where someone is waiting for clarity or completeness before starting something. Okay, and it's more about emotional safety rather than standards. So if someone's seeking perfection before permission, it means before they engage in an action or before they do something, they have to know that it's 100% perfect before they give themselves permission to engage in the activity or the goal that they're trying to achieve or the action that they want to do. And obviously perfection is the robber of well done, if that makes sense.
It sure does. I mean, I have a tendency to have procrastinate. It was what do they call it? Procrastination constipation.
Yeah. Yep.
And that's, I mean, yeah, it's I don't want to do the thing twice.
Right.
And so then I research and research
Yeah.
and research some more.
And you want to make sure it's perfect before you actually do the thing.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, you can measure twice, cut once, but if you're measuring, 5, 6, 7 times,
Yeah.
Before you even think about cutting, well, you should probably just cut.
Yeah.
And see what happens.
The other one you're kind of leaning into is the next one on our list. So we have perfection before permission. That's a cognitive speed bump we have. The next one I want to talk about, the second one, is what I call premature optimization. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
And so you've seen people on social media or TikTok. I've never been on TikTok, to be honest with you, but you see people on social media and they'll take videos of themselves planning things out, right? They spend all this time improving their system and planning their system and perfecting it just right. And so, but what's interesting is they spend all this time planning and optimizing it, but they never actually do it.
They never do the thing.
Yeah, they never do the thing. They spend all the time planning the thing, but they never actually do the thing. So sometimes the kind of speed bump is feeling this need to improve the system that we haven't even started yet, but yet it needs to be improved to make sure that we're successful. And that's premature optimization. That's when optimization replaces progress. The other way I could say it is that planning replaces progress.
One example, like there's different ways to set up your schedule. There's the bullet planner. There's
time blocking. There's all kinds of stuff out there. Yep.
But don't you want to keep looking? If you're like, this system's just not working out for me, I need to try something else. And I've done that before.
You can certainly keep looking, of course, but if all you're doing is looking and you're delaying doing things that you're interested in doing or that you want to do for the sake of finding the perfect tool or the perfect methodology or the perfect way of doing it, you're gonna progress through life not really accomplishing much because you're too busy seeking for the next best way to do it rather than just getting your hands dirty in the first place.
Yeah, no matter what, you gotta get your hands dirty, and if it's not the most ideal way of doing it, but you're still doing it, You're
Right.
going to find your own way. You're going to find your
Yeah.
own way anyways.
Yep.
At some point.
There's some beauty to just doing it, as Nike would say,
Yeah.
rather than just planning to do it all.
Yeah.
You know, you'd look at, and to that end, you can look at athletes. You know, you look at this past weekend has been the NFL wild card playoffs. Not that you watch those, John, but they were a big deal.
Couldn't tell you who's on the Vikings. I could not tell you who's playing on the Vikings.
But for the sake of conversation, like these teams have spent ever since the regular season ended, and they figured out when their seedings were in the playoffs. They have spent all this time preparing and planning and putting in a game plan and getting it ready and getting their players ready. The players themselves have put in all this work leading up to this playoff game. Well, all they did was just kept on planning and planning and planning and never practiced. They would get to the game and they would fall flat because they hadn't put what they had planned into action. Now, was the game plan that they came up with perfect? Probably not. Any coach would tell you that no game plan is perfect. Any player would tell you that no game plan is perfect. But if they never actually got around to actually practicing that imperfect game plan, they're going to get blown out in the game, right?
Sure.
And so that's kind of what premature optimization is. It's really like focusing on how to plan better rather than actually doing the thing in the first place.
Sure.
So that's premature So we have perfection before permission, the first one. The second one is premature optimization. The third common cognitive speed bump that we have is this idea of over-responsibility, I call it. And that is essentially feeling accountable for outcomes that are beyond your control.
Like what?
Trying to anticipate every possible outcome that could be negative that would impact something that you're trying to do. So feeling accountable for things beyond our control is trying to account for every possible setback that you may anticipate, and feeling that somehow you're responsible for them. What that does is it leads to hesitation and then a delay of actually engaging in the action. So if let's say for example, a classic big responsibility that a lot of us have as parents is kids, right?
Right.
If you're planning a family and you're trying to account for every possible outcome of having kids that is beyond your control, and you won't consider starting a family until all those different possibilities can be accounted for, most of them that are beyond your control, you're never going to be able to start your family, right? That's in a very extreme situation.
That makes sense.
I
hear what you're saying.
That's an example of over responsibility is feeling accountable for things that you really have absolutely no control over. Another common one, probably that we more face with every day, is feeling responsible for somebody else's reaction to what you're doing, right? It's certainly okay to be concerned about other people, but if we feel responsible for somebody else's emotional reaction to what we are doing, that's a classic case of over-responsibility.
Right.
And so if our focus, and certainly this doesn't mean that we're rude to other people, but if all we're focused on is how is somebody else going to think about what I'm doing or react to what I'm doing, if that is our only thinking pattern, or if that's the only thing we think about, that's going to cause us to either to hesitate about what we're going to do, delay it, or in some cases never even start it.
Right.
And so it's important to not have over responsibility.
Well, it's not your responsibility you're not in charge of someone else's feelings.
Right.
They need to figure out how to manage this stuff themselves. And if you say something, if you bring something up to them and you hurt their feelings or whatever, or they're offended by it, well, sorry.
The fourth cognitive speed bump is what it's called emotional forecasting errors. You want to take a stab on what that is without reading the notes that you're looking at right now?
Well, okay.
I'm kidding,
I read it, but I can.
I'll help you out.
It's where you like, oh my gosh, if I do this thing, it's going to create a huge issue, and it's going to create strife. It's going to create people aren't going to like it. They're not going to like me. They're going to get mad at me or whatever.
Yeah.
But you just got to do the thing.
It's catastrophizing, essentially.
Yeah.
And it's overestimating how bad something will feel, but underestimating your ability to handle it, right? And so when we emotionally when we make an emotional forecast error, we anticipate that something's going to be, one, much worse than we think it's going to be, and two, we don't feel it will have the ability to handle it. And most of the time, neither one of those things end up being true. One,
Right.
we're typically more capable to handle difficult situations than we give ourselves credit for. And two, the vast majority of the time, a situation is never as bad as we think it's going to be.
Right.
And so our brain is very good at creating all these scenarios and doomsday scenarios to keep us safe, right? Because our brains are designed to keep us safe and to project what could possibly happen.
Right.
Could the worst case scenario happen? Yeah, of course it could. But it's much more likely that it's not going to be that bad.
Right.
And two, we're much more capable than we typically give ourselves credit for.
Do you think people have a tendency to not want to be able to handle something so they can avoid it? Does that make sense?
I think what
Do
you're,
you know what
yeah, I'm trying to think of a way to a better way to frame that. I think there's comfort in not giving yourself enough credit, because if you believe that you can't do something and that you're not capable of handling something,
And when you actually don't handle it,
then you say, well, I didn't do this because I'm not capable of doing it. And that's very comforting. So rather than
yeah,
doing the hard thing, whether it's going out and running that first mile, you're like, well, I'm not in shape yet and I won't be able to make it a mile. I physically can't do it. So I'm just going to watch Netflix. There's comfort knowing that, I didn't get injured because I didn't run, but I can't run because I wasn't capable of doing it. There is comfort in the status quo is what I'm trying to say.
sure, yeah.
And so I think to some extent you're right. We tend to fall into that trap very easily.
Mm-hmm.
The next one, and I think I would argue, so if the first four, the first one is perfection before permission,
Mm-hmm.
Waiting for clarity or completeness before starting. The second one is premature optimization, which is improving systems instead of actually using them. Number 3 is over-responsibility, and that's feeling accountable for outcomes beyond your control. Fourth one is emotional forecasting errors, which we just talked about. And again, that's over simulating how bad something will feel and then underestimating your ability to deal with it.
Mm-hmm.
The final one, and I would say is probably the most harmful and dangerous, and that's all or nothing framing. And what all or nothing framing is that it's where we believe that if something can't be done fully and perfectly, it's not worth even starting.
That's where you have the procrastination, constipation. That's where, that's where you just don't start stuff, because if you can't do it perfectly,
right,
can't do it right the first time, then why even bother?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep. And there's this fallacy that we believe that partial progress feels meaningless, which simply isn't true. And so if we frame something in this all or nothing idea, we believe, well, if I can't do it all right away, there's no point to even starting. It's akin to, and this is, I always like to use extremes to show how ridiculous this is. If someone were to go that has never ran a marathon before and on the day one tries to run the 26 and some odd, however many miles it is to run a full marathon, they can't do it, shocker, because they've never done it. For them to say, because I could not run the full marathon on day one of my training, therefore it's not worth starting. Like that doesn't make any sense, right?
Yeah.
Everybody, any reasonable person would say, even those that hate exercise, would say that is not a reasonable perception of reality. Nobody can go out on day one of training for a marathon and run the entire thing without ever having trained before.
You can wind yourself up in the hospital for one thing.
Yeah, but that's what we do. That's what we do in other areas, though. We look at these people that are successful, or we want to achieve something, and we say, well, because I'm not there, which is way in the distance, because I'm not there right now, I guess it doesn't make any sense to start. And we really sell ourselves short with that all or nothing framing.
How do you think programs such as 75 Hard,
Sure.
where they demand perfection. Like if you fail at one, so those of you who don't know, the 75 Hard is you work out 2 times a day. One time, one has to be outside. Rain, shine, tornado, hurricane, blizzard, that kind of stuff. You have to read, is it 15 pages?
10 pages.
10 pages a day.
Mm-hmm.
And you have to take a picture, a progress picture of yourself.
And you got to follow a diet.
And you got to follow a diet.
And no alcohol.
And no alcohol.
Or drugs.
Or drugs.
Drugs or alcohol.
It kind of coincides with themselves, I guess. And if you miss one of those, like even if you miss taking a progress picture on a day, you have to start completely over.
Yeah.
How does that follow? I mean, I just think that is the kind of program. I mean, that's for people who are just absolutely
Yeah.
bananas. Like they thrive off of perfection.
Mm-hmm.
But that kind of stuff is not for the vast majority of people.
Well, look at
It's more discouraging than anything.
So you want to look at what 75 Hard is doing. Well, it has two things primarily. One, there's extreme structure, and two, there's extreme accountability. And those are two things that some people really strive off of. Now, what we didn't say about 75 Hard is there's things leading up to it before you just dive into it, right? You can't go from eating at Old Country Buffet every day to the next day 75 Hard. I just dated myself. I bet some people don't even know what Old Country Buffet is. But you can't go from eating at McDonald's 3 times a day to the following day then doing 75 Hard, right? You're not going to get there. But what it does provide is a significant framework for people to follow, saying, yep, I'm working towards my goals. And really, like, 75 Hard is kind of fascinating. We should actually do a podcast on it sometime because it's not like anything revolutionary.
Yeah.
Andy Frisella just implemented a extreme structure, and he told people about it, and he just kept following it. And so it's nothing earth-shattering. Any of us could have come up with that and said, "Oh, that's a good idea." You know, that something that could actually stick to that's pretty healthy, and it's pretty disciplined.
Right.
But really, it's just imposing a discipline on somebody,
right.
and it's providing very structured
rules.
It's
just like I mean, I don't want to get too far off topic here, but because I know we're at you have a time limit, but like it's I guess it's kind of like brushing your teeth. I always bring that because no matter what, we always brush our teeth every single day, really without fail.
Right.
And I think that's probably what he's going after with disciplined, healthy habits.
Yep.
And for me, it wasn't for me because I'm a perfectionist, as you know, and if I don't do something perfectly, I'm not going to do it at all.
Yeah.
So this is really good for me. Like 75 Hard is not for me. It's for someone who's like, I'm bored with being super productive. I'm bored with working out every single day.
Well, it's also not practical for a lot of people. You have to understand.
Yeah.
And, some people don't have the time. I mean, could we carve out the time to work out twice a day? Yeah, I sure could, but it's a challenge for most people. But I don't want to get too down the weeds on that one.
Yeah.
So kind of moving on to the next part here is I want to talk about why our brain uses these patterns. It's always good to discuss the fact that it's very difficult to change some of these things because it feels like we're fighting against ourselves. And that's because we are. Like our brain uses those patterns for a specific reason. So these thought patterns that we talked about just previously, and again, at the risk of repeating myself too many times, it's perfection before permission, premature optimization, over-responsibility, emotional forecasting, and all or nothing framing. Those are the common cognitive speed bumps. The reason our brain uses is because they're protective. I call them their protective reflexes that our brain uses. They're automatic responses that our brain projects out into reality to help itself operate efficiently and to keep ourselves safe. So these aren't necessarily flaws that our brain has. It's just that our brain prefers certainty over ambiguity. If we're working towards something, there's a lot of ambiguity. Like, am I going to accomplish this? I don't know. Is someone going to college? Like, there's no guarantee they're going to finish. There's some ambiguity with that. There's a lot between starting college and graduating. Mm-hmm. There's ambiguity there. The brain also prefers control over exposure. So rather than being exposed to risk or exposed to safety issues, it's going to seek to control that as much as it can. And we also all prefer predictability over experimentation. That's why it's always much more comfortable just to watch a Netflix show rather than to go downstairs and walk on the treadmill, or to go read for a little bit, or to go journal, or to go write the article you wanted to write. Our brain prefers predictability over experimenting with new things.
Mm-hmm. Sure.
So your brain isn't trying to stop the car, if we're going to use the speed bump analogy. It's not trying to stop the car. It's really just tapping the brakes to keep things comfortable for us. And that's really what our brain is seeking to do, is to keep us comfortable.
And a lot of times we probably think that our brain is trying to stop the car.
Right. But here's what I would say, and this can also be helpful to kind of flip the whole conversation upside down a little bit, and that is these cognitive speed bumps will only show up typically when something really matters to us. So when something matters to us, that's when we're going to tend to find the resistance, because our brains intrinsically know that we're on a cliff essentially, and it's trying to keep us from jumping off that cliff into the unknown and try to keep us into that predictability that we're used to.
So our brain tries to stop us from doing something that really matters to us because it's afraid.
Well, it wants to keep us safe. It wants to keep it predictable. Yeah. Yep. If you didn't care about something, you're not going to go do it anyway, right?
That's a good point.
If you don't care about,
Touche.
if you don't care about getting your degree, you're not going to waste your time to go get it. And then your brain doesn't have to work so hard to stop you, to keep you safe, right?
Okay, sure. I hear that.
So that's kind of how our brain functions. So the next thing is then how do we notice and move past those speed bumps, right? Is the first one. The first thing is obviously is put a name to it. It's always important to name what you're facing. Labeling reduces friction without argument. Okay, it prevents us. Sometimes if we don't name something, it becomes this vague, ambiguous monster that we haven't been able to address. But once we put a name to it and say, oh, I'm experiencing this right now, or I'm experiencing all or nothing framing. I'm thinking that if I can't do this perfect all the time, therefore it's not worth starting. And a lot of times when we name that speed bump, it takes away a lot of its power.
Sure, okay.
And then once you've named it, then you want to shift from accuracy to movement. So ask what's accurate enough to move on. So rather than focusing on everything you can't do, focus on one small step that you can take to continue moving towards movement. And that's essentially acknowledging that that speed bump or that barrier exists, and then shift from arguing with the barrier or the speed bump to figuring, well, how can I move around it, or how can I move past it? Have you ever heard of time box thinking?
I've not heard that before. That's new.
So time boxing, you've heard of time blocking,
Yes.
right? It's the same thing. It's really putting our thinking into a box and not letting it expand outside of that box. What do I mean? I just mean to limit the amount that you deliberate on something so that analysis doesn't replace action. We're very good, and the reason why we get annoyed with Congress or government, well, that's Congress in particular, is because they can spend so much time deliberating and talking about something and analyzing something, but they never do anything about it.
Yeah.
So, for example, they'll talk till they're blue in the face on these various resolutions, but they never do anything, right? That's irritates us to no end because there's no action. But we do the same thing individually. We deliberate on something so much that we never actually do anything. And so time boxing really says, okay, I'm going to think about this for a set amount of time, but then I'm going to commit to doing something about it, and then being okay with what you decide to do.
Do you have an example of that?
Let's say you're faced with a big decision in life about, purchasing a car.
Sure.
Right. This is going to be a horrible example, but anyway, there's no end to the type of cars you can get, right? There's electric cars, there's Teslas, there's Ford, Chevy, there's so many. Let's say you want to get a truck. You could spend hours planning, looking at different trucks, looking at the different options, looking at the different price ranging, looking at the different financing options, looking at different brands, reading the reviews. But at some time, you're going to need to decide whether or not you're going to get a truck, right? And you actually have to go do it.
Right.
It could be a full-time job researching what kind of truck you're going to buy.
Right.
But if you don't limit that thinking and then say, okay, I'm going to make a decision, the best decision I possibly can, you're never going to get to the action stage. Does that make sense?
It does.
To an extent?
Yep.
We can spend all of our time deliberating such that we don't ever arrive at action. And so time boxing just really limits the amount, gives you constraints around how much you think about something without getting paralysis of the analysis.
How do you know what's enough? What's enough?
You have to put a frame around it. You have to put a time frame around it.
So you have to decide yourself.
Yeah. The worst thing, if you don't time box yourself, it's the kind of the conversation we've had where you're just kicking the can down the road. At some point, you need to stop the thinking about it and just make a decision about it, or decide that you're just not going to decide. Does it make sense?
Yeah. Yep. He's going to decide to walk away from it.
And I would say your question was how much time is too much time? Well, that depends on the situation. If you're talking about are we going to sell our house and move somewhere else, that is a very big decision that may take a couple months.
Right.
Whereas if you're trying to decide, well, this may be more dramatic and more significant. If you're deciding where you and your wife are going to go out to eat at, that can be, maybe you don't need so much time. But I would argue that does take months.
That one requires, and that is a never-ending battle of trying to figure out where we're going to go to eat.
Yeah. But we can overanalyze anything.
Right.
And so at some point you just have to decide, okay, we're going to talk about this, think about this for a little bit, for X amount of time, and then we're going to actually decide on what it's going to be.
Sure.
And then be okay with that decision.
Well, it was kind of like me when I was getting a dog.
Sure.
I mean, we grew up with dogs. I love dogs, but I was like, well, is this the right time for me to get a dog? Well, I waited and waited and waited and thought about it and thought about it and thought about it. I'm like, you know what? I'm just going to go take a look at a dog.
Yeah.
I'm going to go take a look at a Doberman, and went there. I'm like, I wish I didn't come here because I have to have this dog.
Yeah.
Now. I mean, I finally decided to get off the pot.
Yeah.
So to speak. I got off the pot, and I
Yep.
went out and did it, and haven't looked back ever since, except I just got a picture from my wife, and my dog had to go to the bathroom and just decided to scratch up our molding around the front door. So
it's at that point they decide we're going to give the dog back.
yeah, we're going to give the dog back. Yes.
So that's kind of time box thinking. You had to at one point just stop thinking about whether or not you're going to get a dog and decide if you were going to get a dog or not, and then put it to rest.
Yeah.
The problem we have, and it doesn't mean that you have to necessarily do what you're thinking about doing, but if you never allow yourself to come to a decision, your brain can never put it to rest. So that's time box thinking. The next one is replace before with during. So rather than saying before we do anything, we need to make sure we have a plan, and we need to make sure the plan is perfect, and we need to make sure every contingency is figured out.
Yeah.
So rather than figuring all that before, figure it out as you go, maybe, right?
Sure.
I'm kind of fascinated sometimes by the U.S. Secret Service. So whenever the president, regardless of who the president is, this is not a political discussion, but the president, like the U.S. Secret Services, they always have contingency plans, and they think of every possible scenario to get the president from point A to point B. So if the president is going from the Air Force One to some fundraising event and down wherever, the Secret Service has planned out the route, and they have figured out every single contingency for every single possibility of what might happen. And so they can quickly make a decision. What I would tell you is we're not transporting the president of the United States with every decision. So we can figure it out as we go. I would say that, again, as before I said, perfection is the enemy of progress. If we're seeking perfection before we even start something, you're never going to achieve what you want to achieve.
But
figure it out as you go.
But doesn't figuring it out as you go, can't that be perceived as careless sometimes?
It can be perceived as risky.
Or risky or reckless.
Of course it is. Yeah,
Okay.
of course it is. But anything worth doing comes with risk. You look at successful business owners, there was a point where if they kept just planning, their dreams of owning whatever business would never come to fruition. At some point, they just had to start doing it and then figuring it out as they went along.
Accept that risk.
Figure it out doing. Yep. And then when you have a kind of speed bump or a negative thought about something, do a momentum check. And what I mean by that is just ask whether the thought helps movement or is just for safety. Mm-hmm. And it's good to think about thinking. Think about our thinking. That's called introspection. Is think about our thinking process, which is something which we do all the time, but it's a very sophisticated mental process that typically only humans are able to do.
Thinking about thinking.
Thinking about thinking, isn't that how that? Now, what's really good when it really gets complicated is when you're thinking about thinking. Then it gets challenging. Yeah.
But then you're thinking about the thoughts you're thinking before you start thinking about the thinking.
Yeah, I can't follow what you're saying.
And that's where it really gets to. That's where you think a thunk. And you start reading Dr. Seuss books.
So let's, rather than continuing going down that, let's talk about a new relationship with thinking.
Reel it in.
So what I want to remind people is that think about thoughts as tools. Okay? They're not commands. So when you go to Home Depot or Lowe's or Menards, whatever home improvement store that you prefer, see all those tools. Think of all those tools as your thoughts. And not every tool in the store, you don't need every tool for every project.
Right.
But it's still okay to have them. They're not a waste to have them. But the tools don't tell you what to do. They just suggest what you might do. And so it's important to think of thoughts that way as well. Thoughts are tools. Some are useful, and some aren't, given the context. If you need to hammer in a nail, a saw is not going to help you, right?
Usually not. No.
And in the same way, if you need to run a marathon, or if you want to train for a marathon, telling yourself you're completely incapable of physical activity is just a loud noise that's not helpful.
Yeah, sure.
So thoughts are tools. The other thing that's important to know about thinking is that clarity is rarely a prerequisite for movement. At no point do you need perfect clarity to start something that you desire to start. All right. Movement is often a prerequisite for clarity. So it's kind of the opposite way. And let's use the example of having kids, right?
There's absolutely no clarity whatsoever.
There's no clarity whatsoever. Some people try to achieve clarity as much as they possibly can, and maybe they feel that they've achieved the clarity that they need before they start their family, but they would also tell you that as soon as they had that kid, they realized that they had absolutely no clarity about what they were doing, and all their plans went out the window.
And reading all those books on how to raise kids and what to expect when you're expecting and all that stuff. I mean, they're all great and fine, but every family is completely different. That was written by a doctor or a mother or a father who had their experience, and their experience went, well, like, hey, I'm going to monetize this, as they should. But people got to understand that stuff is not going to work for everybody in every situation.
Yep. And so I would just argue that you don't necessarily need a quieter mind, to avoid cognitive speed bumps. You just need a better working relationship with it. The Christian faith, and you and I are Christians, it talks a lot about being a master of your thoughts and taking control of your own thoughts, or taking captive your thoughts is the term that's used. Yep. And really what that's talking about is don't be a victim of whatever your brain floods at you. Our thoughts are just a series of electric neurological responses that our brain is just firing at us. And so just because we have a thought doesn't mean we need to be controlled by it. In the flip side, it's actually the opposite is true, is we are the ones that need to take control of our own thoughts rather than letting our thoughts controlling ourselves is the most important thing to remember about this.
Yeah.
So I want to close with a mini challenge because we went down a couple of rabbit holes here. This week, I always like to leave a mini challenge with people. Notice one moment where you slow down mentally. Don't fix it or argue with it. Just name it. Name why you feel you're slowing down. Why did you hit a speed bump? Why do you feel unmotivated? Why do you feel your momentum is stopping in that particular moment? And again, don't fix it or argue with it. Just name it. Mm-hmm. And then once you identify what's holding you back, take the next step anyway. Whether it's imperfect, whether it's partial, whether it's just provisional, take the step anyway to build your momentum back.
That's maintaining power.
Exactly.
Over your thoughts.
Yep.
Maintaining control. Like, hey, I'm still the one in control. I'm not succumbing to when thoughts, whether it be positive or negative.
Yep. Yeah. So in closing now, you don't need fewer thoughts. You need fewer thoughts in charge.